You might be pretty familiar with the story of Jesus calming the storm, but how often have you actually imagined yourself in the story? Now, there are these imaginative prayer practices where that's the point. You imagine yourself as a disciple. You imagine yourself as the wind. You imagine yourself as the cushion Jesus sleeps on. Imaginative prayer practices have existed for a long, long time, but I don't think we give enough credit to the writers of the Gospels who were doing something similar, providing their readers with these ways into the story to make their point. So at the beginning of Mark's version of the first perilous journey at sea, he says that there are several boats that set out for the other side, the Gentile side of the Sea of Galilee or the Lake of Galilee. And then the extra boats disappear. But before they disappear, you're invited to get in one of the boats, to be involved in the story, and to stay curious about how this story of Jesus addressing the panic of his friends in a storm is like other stories they already know. Only now, Jesus is doing something new with the storm. And through your imagination, you're there in a boat too. You're listening to Jesus's rebuke and you're examining your own faith. And I think the question that the disciples ask is such a sacred question that throughout our lives we will ask too. God, are you asleep? And this story invites you into the storm, into the panic, and may it be so, into a kind of sturdy faith that brings calm from the chaos of life. So here's a section of the sermon from the end of Mark 4 I called Sleeping Deity.
Now, what's up with the boats, plural? And I pointed out because they're mentioned here in the setup, but then they disappear and we're eventually left with only one boat. And I've been reading the Bible carefully and academically for far too long to ignore the case of the missing boats. And scholars offer some pretty hot takes. One, the extra boats are lost in translation. Something just doesn't work after all this time with this detail in the text. So basically, who cares? Move on. Second option, this is a storm story, and that can only mean that the extra boats don't make it out safely. And that is pretty bleak for the text to not care about, so I'm like, meh. 3, Job sunk the yacht. JK, that's Arrested Development. But seriously, there is a third option, and it's this. Like the gospel writers are prone to do, the boats offer the readers an imaginative way into the story. And I think that's what Mark is doing here. It's like, see? All the boats? There's plenty of room. Get in. Let's go to the other side. What for, you might ask? It's simple, really. Come along to see who Jesus is for yourself. So you've stepped into a boat, but you might soon regret it because a furious squall came up and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Now, we don't exactly speak like the NIV, do we? Nobody says, on the way across Auburn Bay, a furious squall came up. So let me break down the nature of the storm. It is a mighty blast. It is a whirlwind out of nowhere. It's the kind of literary storm that you'd expect would make the characters completely wrecked with fear. So let's play a little game of hot and cold to look at what this situation is like when it comes to storytelling. Biblical stories are never just stories. They are meaning-making machines. So first, a little cool but getting warmer. A storm at sea and a hero asleep could make ancient listeners think about Homer's Odyssey. And in the Odyssey, Odysseus is on many perilous adventures as he tries to get home to Ithaca. And in Book 10, Odysseus is asleep when his men open up a bag that holds the wind, and the whirlwind rushes out and stirs up a storm that threatens their lives. And in Emily Wilson's brilliant translation, Odysseus says, "A sudden buffet seized us and hurled us back to sea, the wrong direction, far from home. They screamed and I woke up." And in both stories, the crew, with their hero asleep, begin to panic, and doubt overtakes them like the water crashing into the boat. Now, we get warmer and a little closer to the meaning when we think about how the story of Jesus, asleep in the storm, is like the biblical story of Jonah, asleep in a storm. Only in that story, Jonah is running from God. God had told Jonah to go to Nineveh, Gentile alert, but Jonah hates that plan because he hates the Ninevites. Instead, he gets in a boat to go in the opposite direction. What happens? Yahweh tracks him down with a mighty whirlwind. And where's Jonah? You remember it, fast asleep in the hold of the ship. And the crew is terrified. And when they ask him for help, Jonah says the only way to get out of this pickle is to pick him up and to throw him into the sea. So this Jesus asleep story, it's not exactly like Jonah's, is it? But you can't help but think it's meant to hint at it. And early Christians even spoke about Jesus as a kind of Jonah that finally gets it right. And finally, the warmest possibility is that Jesus is not exactly a powerful hero like Odysseus, and he's not a reluctant prophet like Jonah. Here, in this storm, Jesus will wake up and show himself to be so powerful that if they didn't know better, they'd be sure he was God. But before we get to the calm that you know is coming after the storm, I do want to slow us down in this panic. It's a short story, so we're just taking a pause. Because if your faith is honest, and I truly hope that it is, then you, like these disciples, have likely been caught in a storm that came out of nowhere. Could be a storm of betrayal, a storm of grief, a storm of crisis. And you've certainly witnessed the storms that are all around us. Storms of war, storms of corrupt financial dealings, storms of history of our own collective making. And in your honesty, you have voiced a cry like that of the disciples.
Hey, Jeremy here, and thank you for clicking through to watch that video. If you're intrigued by the work that we're doing here at Commons, you can, of course, hit subscribe to keep up to date with all of the content that we're posting here on YouTube. You can head to our website at commons.church, and you can find us on all of the socials at Commons Church. You can also join our Discord. There, the community is having all kinds of conversations about how we can encourage each other in the way of Jesus. Head to commons.church/Discord for the invite there. Also, leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you and all the ways that you are journeying on this path toward Jesus. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all the ways that you contribute to this conversation together. We'll see you soon.